What would you do if hospital records showed a patient who died 3 years ago was still receiving care? How would you react if medical charts updated themselves every night with vitals for someone who shouldn't exist? And what if you were the only one who seemed to notice something was terribly wrong? My name is Rachel Chen, and I'm a registered nurse at Mercy General Hospital in Philadelphia. I started working here 6 months ago, fresh out of nursing school, eager and terrified in equal measure. Night shift on the 4th floor, the medical surgical unit. It wasn't my first choice, but as a new graduate, you take what you can get. The pay differential for nights helped with my student loans, and the hospital had a good reputation for training new nurses. The 4th floor was old. Mercy General had been built in stages over decades, and this wing dated back to the 1970s. They'd renovated it cosmetically, new paint and updated equipment, but the bones were old. Long corridors with fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. Linoleum floors that had been waxed so many times they were permanently yellowed. Patient rooms that were too small by modern standards, some still having just curtains instead of doors for privacy. My preceptor during orientation was a nurse named Margaret who'd worked at Mercy for 30 years. She was efficient, no nonsense, and had seen everything. On my first night, she walked me through the unit layout, pointing out supply rooms, crash carts, the medication dispensary. Room 447 is always empty, she said as we passed a closed door near the end of the hall. Don't assign patients there unless absolutely necessary. Why not? I asked. Just hospital superstition. Every floor has a room nobody likes. This is ours. She kept walking without elaborating. I learned quickly that night shift had its own rhythm. Quieter than days, but with its own kinds of intensity. Fewer staff, sicker patients, family members who couldn't visit during regular hours showing up at odd times. You handled emergencies with less backup. You made decisions alone that you'd normally run past a supervisor. By November, I was off orientation and working independently. I knew my patients, knew the routines, felt competent, if not yet confident. The night shift team was small and close-knit. Besides me, there was Margaret, 2 other nurses named James and Linda, and our night supervisor, Dr. Reyes, who covered the entire hospital. On November 15th, a Tuesday, I arrived for my 7 p.m. shift and received my patient assignment. 5 patients, typical load. I did my rounds, checking on each one, reviewing their charts, administering medications. Everything routine. Around 11 p.m., I was at the nurses' station finishing my documentation when I noticed something odd in the computer system. There was a patient chart flagged for my review. Room 447, patient Robert Henley. I frowned. Room 447 was supposed to be empty. It had been empty every shift I'd worked. I pulled up the chart. Robert Henley, 67-year-old male, admitted November 10th for observation following a fall. The chart showed vitals taken every 4 hours, medication administration records, nursing notes from the day shift. Everything properly documented as if this were an active patient. But I'd walked past room 447 earlier. The door was closed. The lights were off. There was no patient assignment sheet on the door, no nameplate, nothing indicating anyone was in there. I checked the admission records. Robert Henley had been admitted 5 days ago by Dr. Patterson, one of our hospitalists. The admission note cited concerns about possible head injury and need for neurological monitoring. But I'd never seen Dr. Patterson mention this patient during rounds. Had never heard any nurse discuss him. "Hey, Margaret," I called across the station. "Do we have a patient in 447? Margaret looked up from her charting. 1447? No, that room's empty. Why? The computer shows Robert Henley assigned to that room, admitted 5 days ago. That's a mistake. Someone probably entered the wrong room number. Check with day shift tomorrow to get it corrected. But something about it nagged at me. I opened the detailed chart history. The most recent entry was from 10 p.m. tonight, just an hour ago. Vital signs recorded: BP 128.82, HR 74, RR 16, temp 98.6, completely normal. And a nursing note: patient resting comfortably, no complaints, Neurological exam unchanged. Who had entered that note? I checked the user ID. The note was attributed to me, entered by R. Chen RN at 10:00 p.m. But I hadn't entered anything. I'd been giving medications to my actual patients at 10 p.m. I definitely hadn't gone into room 447 or assessed any Robert Henley. Margaret, this is weird. The latest nursing note is supposedly from me, but I didn't write it. Margaret came over and looked at the screen. Her expression shifted from curious to concerned. That's not right. Are you sure you didn't accidentally document on the wrong patient? I'm positive. I haven't been near room 447 all night. Let me check something. She pulled up her own workstation and started typing. After a moment, she shook her head. I don't see any Robert Henley in our active patients list, but if you're looking at his chart, it must be in the system somewhere. Should I report this to Dr. Reyes? Not yet. Let me do some digging first. Might just be a database error. We had issues last month with duplicate records showing up. I'd had to do a system purge. I went back to my patients, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. During my 2 a.m. medication pass, I walked down to room 447. The door was closed, as always. I pressed my ear against it, listening. No sounds from inside. No monitors beeping, no breathing, nothing. I tried the door handle. Locked. That was unusual. Patient rooms weren't typically locked from the outside. I pulled out my master key and unlocked it, pushing the door open slowly. The room was dark. I flipped on the lights. Empty. Not just vacant, but completely stripped. No bed, no IV pole, no monitors, just bare walls, a single chair in the corner, and years of dust on the windowsill. This room clearly hadn't been used in a long time. I stood there confused. The chart showed an active patient with vitals taken an hour ago, but the room was empty and obviously unused. None of this made sense. I closed the door and went back to the nurse's station. Margaret was on break, so I decided to dig deeper into the chart myself. I opened Robert Henley's admission history, tracing back through the records. What I found made my skin crawl. According to the system, Robert Henley had been a patient at Mercy General continuously since March 2021, nearly 3 years. The chart showed thousands of entries, nursing notes, doctor's orders, vital signs, medication administrations, all routine, all indicating a stable patient requiring observation, but no discharge date, no transfer, just an endless series of entries documenting the same basic care day after day after day. I scrolled back further, looking for the original admission. I found it. March 8, 2021. Robert Henley, 67-year-old male, admitted via emergency department following a fall. Witnessed loss of consciousness. CT scan showed small subdural hematoma. Admitted for neurological monitoring. But then I found something else. 3 weeks after that admission, there was a death certificate in the file. Robert Henley had died on March 29, 2021 at 3:47 a.m. Cause of death, intracranial hemorrhage, complications from fall. He'd been dead for 3 years, yet the chart showed him still here, still receiving care, still having vitals recorded every 4 hours. My hands were shaking as I printed the death certificate and several pages of the recent documentation. I needed to show this to someone. This wasn't just a computer error. This was something deeply wrong. Margaret returned from break and I showed her what I'd found. She studied the printouts, her face growing pale. "This isn't possible," she said quietly. "A patient can't have an active chart after a death certificate is filed. The system automatically closes the record." But it didn't. It's still open, still being documented. Look at the timestamps. Notes are being entered every single day, multiple times a day. Margaret checked the user IDs on the notes. These are from different nurses, different shifts. How has nobody noticed they're documenting on a dead patient? Maybe they don't know. Maybe the system is showing him as a regular patient to everyone, and they're just doing their jobs. We need to report this to IT and administration immediately. At 2 a.m.? This can't wait until morning. Margaret paged Dr. Reyes, our night supervisor. While we waited for her to arrive, I kept reading through the chart. The entries were disturbingly mundane. Normal vitals, patient resting comfortably, no complaints. Neurological exam stable. Over and over for 3 years, the same basic notes documenting a patient who was supposedly fine and just needed continued observation. Dr. Reyes arrived 15 minutes later, looking annoyed at being called for what she probably assumed was a minor issue. That changed quickly when we showed her the evidence. "How has this not been caught before?" she asked, scrolling through the records on screen. 3 years of documentation on a deceased patient. Where are the quality assurance checks, the audits? "I don't know," Margaret said, but Rachel found her own name on tonight's entries, notes she didn't write. Dr. Reyes looked at me. "You're certain you didn't document on this patient?" "Absolutely certain. I've never even heard of Robert Henley until tonight. And room 447 is empty. We just checked." "Show me." The three of us walked down the hall to room 447. I unlocked the door again and we entered. Still empty, still dusty, still clearly unused for years. Dr. Reyes pulled out her phone and took photos. "This is going to administration first thing in the morning. In the meantime, nobody documents anything else on Robert Henley. We'll flag the chart as problematic and start an investigation." She left to write up an incident report. Margaret and I returned to the nurses' station, both of us unsettled. "Has anything like this ever happened before?" I asked. Margaret hesitated. "There have been stories about room 447, nothing official, just things people say." "What kind of stories?" "That patients die in that room more often than they should. That sometimes staff hear things from there when it's empty. That it's unlucky." She shook her head. "I always thought it was just hospital folklore. Every old hospital has rooms like that. But this... Do you think it's connected? Robert Henley dying in that room and then his chart staying active? I think there's a rational explanation we're just not seeing yet. Database corruption. Some technical glitch. It has to be." But she didn't sound convinced. The rest of the shift passed slowly. I kept checking Robert Henley's chart, watching to see if any new entries appeared. None did. At 6:30 a.m., I gave report to the day shift nurse taking over my patients. I mentioned the situation with room 447 to her and she looked confused. "We don't use 447, she said. "That room's been closed for years. Since before I started here." "Why is it closed?" "Infrastructure issues, I think. Something about the electrical system being unsafe. They keep saying they'll fix it and reopen it, but they never do." After my shift, I was exhausted but couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those thousands of chart entries. Someone had been entering them. Multiple someones. Different nurses, different shifts, all documenting care for a patient who didn't exist. Unless they did exist. Unless something was happening in room 447 that nobody wanted to acknowledge. I returned from my shift that evening with a sense of dread I couldn't shake. The hospital felt different, more oppressive. The fluorescent lights seemed dimmer. The halls seemed longer. At the nurses' station, Margaret pulled me aside immediately. "I'd investigated today. They can't explain it. The entries are real, not corrupted data. They're being entered by real user IDs from real terminals. But when they interviewed the nurses whose names are on the entries, none of them remember documenting on Robert Henley. How is that possible? They don't know. They've escalated it to their senior database architects. Administration is treating it as a potential security breach, someone hacking into the system and creating false records. But why? What would be the point? No idea. But there's more. They pulled the security camera footage from the 4th floor for the past week. And room 447's door opens and closes multiple times per shift. But the cameras don't show anyone going in or out. The door just opens and closes on its own. A chill ran down my spine. That's not possible. I know. They're saying it must be a camera malfunction. But Rachel, I've worked here for 30 years. I've seen a lot of strange things in hospitals. And this is the strangest. That night around midnight, I was at my computer finishing a medication administration when a new entry appeared in Robert Henley's chart. I watched it happen in real time. The cursor moved down to a new line, and text began appearing letter by letter, as if someone were typing. 11/16/2024/00:15. Patient awake and alert. Asking about family. Explained no visitors this evening. Patient expressed disappointment but remained cooperative. Vitals stable. R. Chen RN. I stared at my name at the bottom of the note I hadn't written. Margaret, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. It's happening again. She came over and saw the entry. Did you write that? No. I watched it appear, like someone was typing it in real time. We both stared at the screen. After a moment, another entry began appearing. 11/16/2024/00:22. Patient requesting pain medication. Administered Tylenol 650 mg PO as ordered. Patient states pain improved. R. Chen RN. We need to check the room, I said, standing up. Right now. Margaret and I walked quickly down the hall to room 447. The door was closed. I put my hand on the handle and felt it was warm, as if someone had just touched it. I pulled my hand back. Do you feel that? I whispered. Margaret touched the handle. It's warm. How is it warm? I unlocked the door and pushed it open. The room was still empty, still dusty. But now there was a smell, faint but distinct. Antiseptic. Bleach. The smell of a hospital room that's being actively used and cleaned. We stepped inside. The air felt different, somehow denser. I walked to where a bed would normally be positioned. The floor there was clean. No dust. As if a bed had been there recently, protecting that section of floor. Someone's been in here, Margaret said. Cleaning. Setting up equipment. But who? And when? I noticed something else. On the chair in the corner was a clipboard. I walked over and picked it up. It was a paper chart, the old-fashioned kind we'd mostly phased out. The pages were yellowed with age, but the writing on them was fresh. Black ink, clear handwriting, nursing notes for Robert Henley, dated today. Look at this, I showed Margaret. These are paper notes, written by hand. She took the clipboard and flipped through the pages. These go back days, weeks. Someone's been maintaining a paper chart. But why? We haven't used paper charts for years except as backups. A sound from the hallway made us both jump. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming toward the room. We froze, listening. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. We waited, neither of us breathing. After a long moment, the footsteps resumed, walking away. We hurried out of the room and looked down the hall. Empty. No one visible in either direction. This is too much, Margaret said, her voice shaking. We need to report this immediately. Not just to Dr. Reyes, to administration, to security. Something very wrong is happening here. We went back to the nurses' station and Margaret called security while I called Dr. Reyes. Within 20 minutes, we had 4 security guards and Dr. Reyes examining room 447. They found everything we'd found. The clean floor, the warm door handle, the paper chart. They also found something we'd missed. A fresh IV bag hanging on a pole we hadn't noticed before, tucked in the corner behind where the door opened. The IV bag was half empty. Recent medication administration records were attached to it, showing doses given over the past several hours. But there was no patient. No IV line. Just the bag, hanging and slowly dripping into nothing. Security reviewed the camera footage. It showed exactly what Margaret had said. The door opening and closing, but no one entering or exiting. The timestamp on the most recent opening was 12:05 a.m., just minutes before Margaret and I had gone down there. Something or someone had been in that room just before we arrived. Administration shut down the entire 4th floor for investigation the next day. All patients were temporarily moved to other units. IT specialists, security experts, and even a consulting firm were brought in to examine the electronic medical record system, the physical space, everything. What they found was worse than a simple technical glitch. Room 447 had been the site of multiple patient deaths over the years. more than statistical probability would predict. And in every case, the charts showed unusual patterns of documentation. Notes appearing after the patient had died. Entries attributed to nurses who claimed they hadn't written them. A pattern going back decades that had somehow never been connected or investigated. Robert Henley was just the most recent. But there had been others. Dorothy Yang in 2018, Marcus Freeman in 2015, Sarah Delgado in 2011. The list went back to the 1980s, names of patients who had died in room 4047 and whose charts continued to show active care long after their deaths. The consulting firm's report was clinical and careful, but its conclusions were unavoidable. Something about the documentation process was fundamentally broken, creating phantom patients and phantom care records. But they couldn't explain how. They couldn't identify a mechanism, a bug, a human error pattern. The records were being created, but by what or whom remained unclear. The hospital's response was bureaucratic. Room 4047 was formally closed and sealed. The fourth floor was extensively renovated, though room 447 itself remained untouched. New protocols were implemented for chart audits and quality assurance. Staff were trained on identifying and reporting anomalous records. But none of that explained what Margaret and I had experienced. The entries appearing in real time, the warm door handle, the paper chart with fresh writing, the IV bag dripping into emptiness. 3 weeks later, I was working night shift when I noticed something. A new patient chart had appeared in the system, room 448, right next to the sealed 447. Patient, Dorothy Yang. But Dorothy Yang had died in 2018. I'd seen her name in the investigation report. I pulled up her chart. Same pattern. Admitted for observation. Normal vitals. Routine care notes. Documentation stretching back days with the most recent entry from an hour ago. The entry was attributed to me. I stood up from the computer and walked down the hall. Room 448's door was closed. I could hear something from inside. Not voices exactly, but sounds. Movement. Equipment beeping. The ambient noise of an occupied hospital room. I placed my hand on the door handle. It was warm. I haven't opened that door yet. I've been standing here in the hallway for 10 minutes trying to decide what to do. Call Margaret? Call Dr. Reyes? Call someone? Or just open the door and see what's really happening? See who's in there, receiving care from nurses who don't remember providing it. See if Robert Henley is in there with Dorothy Yang. See if they're waiting for the next person to join them. Behind me, I hear footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Coming down the hallway toward me. I turn to look, but the hallway is empty. The footsteps continue, getting closer. Room 448's door handle turns under my hand, warm and alive. The door begins to open from the inside. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell for more unsettling tales. Drop a comment below. Have you ever worked in healthcare and experienced something you couldn't explain? Have you ever felt like a place was remembering things that shouldn't be remembered? Share your stories. And remember, the next time you're in a hospital late at night and hear sounds from a room that's supposed to be empty, maybe don't investigate. Some patients never leave, even after they're gone. Sleep well.